Hey, it's Chris. So the first thing that I look for any game nowadays is, what does this game do that's different? What makes this game unique? What makes me want to get this game apart from everything else? Especially when we're talking about crowdfunding nowadays, when you see thematic games, you see crawling games, you see mechanistic games with similar approaches, styles, and themes all over the place. So today we're talking from OOMM, we're talking about Stonesaga. I'm going to run you through a general overview of things. I'm going to tell you what you need to know. I'm going to show you what it's doing, why it's doing something different, and where it fits in the scheme of things comparatively. If that sounds interesting, let's do this. So the first thing that you're going to notice about Stonesaga from OOMM, it has a very similar aesthetic as well as just general vibe of their previous game, Mythwind, of this open world, do it how you want, with some asymmetry sort of situation. And if you like that, I'm already going to tell you at the beginning of this video that this is significantly different than Mythwind. This is significantly different than other games that are out there already. First off, that's probably the most important thing to know. You can see just by the general look, it's slightly different, but the mechanics of how it is different when you're taking your hex-based approach as you travel across the land, establishing outposts, building, scavenging, crafting, surviving, and discovering, not to mention delving, enough ing words for everybody there. That's what you're doing in this game. And how it does it is the difference. It gives you, just from the get-go, a vibe that's very similar to, say, Lands of Galzier, in a different sense of the Zen-like open-world exploration as you gradually explore these tiles, as they become more available, as you venture across the land. However, it's completely not app-based, so you don't have to worry about that, which is both a blessing and a curse. Because without showing you anything right here, I can tell you that I have about 8 different decks off camera here at the top that you're going to be having to navigate. But it's important that these decks are elements of things because they're going to be highly interactive in how you're using the cards. Not only the cards themselves individually, but also how the cards are going to sort of mesh together. And that's something we haven't really seen in a couple of these other ones, like Forests of Radgast, which had sort of the 17 different decks that it used. Lands of Galzier, where you're pulling cards more secretly from like a legacy style, campaign game-ish realm of things. But this is taking a deck, say here of the plains, and you're opening these up and you're taking them, flipping them over, and choosing on the cards themselves how you actually want them to be. And so the difference here, if we zoom in, is you can see that the cards themselves actually have multiple elements on them that you're going to be choosing from, and you're going to be stacking them next to each other in order to make sort of a diorama-esque picture, and then picking from them in that regard. Now, if we pull out the forest deck here, in a different example, you can see again how you're going to be having different elements there, different choices, and different resources that are going to be able to be gathered in a very interesting mechanism of I can only get so much as well. And that's the other intriguing aspect here. When you go back to the situation of the main game here, when we go back to the other focus of this is the main player board, where you're going to be taking the mantle of one of the characters, if you will, that are asymmetric, that are going to have abilities that you're going to be able to access as you unlock them throughout the game. And this player board is very, very, very important. The two things that this game has en masse, in plethora, are tokens. I have 3 huge bags of tokens here that are all going to be available, and I have the decks of cards, like I already mentioned. Now, the tricky point here is you're going to be doing sort of a Diablo-esque, if you're familiar with the video game, sort of style of organization, meaning as you collect these resources, you have to be able to fit them in your carrying pouch. It's not like a hold limit of 14 pounds or 10 items. It's you scrunch them in there, you make them fit, and you can hold as many resources as this shape is going to allow you while they're flat down. And if you can't fit it in there, then becomes the problem. And not only are you going to have these circular shapes, you're also going to have these square shapes that are going to take up space. And so that's the main core and crux of what you're doing in terms of the gathering from those places, the forests and the plains, like I mentioned. Now you also have another area with the river, and the river is also very unique here. We'll set this out so you can kind of see how it entails. But what you end up doing is you end up having 3 cards that are essentially going to be used that slowly connect to each other. So with this river card, for example, you have a target value over here on the left side. You have to get 4, you have to get 8 to get this resource, you have to get 3 to get one of these resources. And you have a line that corresponds to that that goes to the other end. And before you get to the other end, you don't actually know what the modifier is over here, but in this case you can see. So if I actually knew those modifiers when I rolled my 4d6s, I could then allocate and say, well, I know that, for example, this white one is going to have a +4 and I need to get 8. So if I put just a 5 going through here, this will actually get me the bonus I need to get the resources. But you don't know that, so you're actually going to be allocating them when that is still hidden, trying to give you the most optimal values in each of the areas without knowing how things are going to be affected and then what resources you're going to get. And so that's the tricky part there, because these are the resources, the water, the fish, the rocks that you're going to be gathering. And why that's important, again, it goes back to my little guy right below here that you can see of putting them in there. And so that is some of the actions that you're going to be taking in this open world sort of scenario. Now, the tricky part with all of this is at the bottom of my player board here, you can see that there are several spots that correspond to other tokens. And these tokens are your energy action resources. And so you only have so many of these starting out, and you only replenish so many of them on a turn-by-turn basis. And so it's not unlimited action. It's not a game that is going to refill you every time. If you don't have an outpost, if you aren't clothed properly, if you aren't fed properly, your energy is not going to return. And so the action incorporation system is highly integrated with how you're going to be managing a turn-by-turn basis. Make sense so far? Yes. Now, the other aspect that I have to talk about that struck out very promptly to me when I was looking at this was my concern with a game like this always, as I mentioned previously in another video, how accessible is this game going to be? When I look at games like this, these open world games, when I look at these big expansive narrative games, right? Like Madara, Adventure Tactics, Aeon Trespass Odyssey. Now, again, obviously different overall, but the commonality between all of those is that they all require a certain number of player count or a certain number of players to be able to play. You know, Aeon Trespass Odyssey, you need to be playing 4 characters. Doesn't matter how many players you have. Adventure Tactics, you need to have 3. Madara, you need to have 4. You don't play with any less characters than that. And so with this one, I love the fact that they've said, hey, you know what? You solo people out there, right? We got this. We got you. You can play this with 1 person, 2-handed. You can play it with 2 people, 2 players. You can play 3, you can play 4. And it works. And that is unique because not all of these types of games allow you to do that as easily. And there's something to be said of a game that doesn't make you have to manage 4 characters all the time, because the amount of brain burniness, the amount of decision making that is meaningful in this game is going to leave you wanting someone else to consult with on a regular basis. Let me tell you why, because this is the other main aspect of this game. The other main aspect is as you're using, say, these energy tokens and you're spending them, because all of those things I described, the plains, the forests, the fishing, the delving, all of that requires a certain amount of this energy. So when you spend it, you get those resources that I mentioned. But when you get those resources, this is the main crux of the game. If the other elements of things are just sort of meh for you, this is the most important point of this video. This is the trial combination sort of system, if you're familiar with it, sort of a la Role Player Adventures. Where Role Player Adventures, you had cards that were numbered 1 and like 74. And it said, okay, put those together, and if it makes an item, go to 1.74 in the book. If there's something there, great. If there's not something there, well, obviously nothing happens. And sometimes something happened if there was something there, and sometimes something bad happened. or sometimes it just sort of kaputted you. Like it was like, haha, you just wasted energy by making something that didn't work. And so it uses a similar system here with the tokens that I have, these square tokens that I showed you just a little bit ago. So you'll see on the close-up here that these square tokens all have different number of dots on each side, as well as different colors of dots on each side. And why that's important is because when you're building something, you align them accordingly. And so then you get to read the dots going across. For example, this would be a 3 red, 3, 6, 3. The first one dictates the color, and then the rest are all included in the numbers. So you'd look for red 3 and a number pattern of 3, 3, 6, 3. So then we go over to this absolutely freaking massive deck of craftables. I mean, this thing is literally probably about 4 inches tall of craftables. And this is from the prototype copy, folks. The prototype copy. Now, it's not all unique, but there's a lot of unique and not too many duplicate. And you'll see here, as I pull this up for you here at the bottom of the card, you can see green 6001, and then they all just get thumbed through, right? And some are, multiple different ways of making them. And you just have this absolutely massive deck, and you flip it over and you can see, for example, here, I have a necklace of feathers, and it tells you what it does. Limit 1 per necklace, limit 1 per character. You're resourceful. Resourceful is a keyword that allows you to get other skills and other checks along the way. Before testing this, you may spend 1 energy to gain a major boost. And so, it allows you to get benefits. And you're going to be crafting everything from outposts to items to weapons that allow you to hunt better, to allow you to catch things better, to capture more of them, to gather more resources more efficiently, all of those things. And like I said, massive, massive deck here that I can't even get through playing it multiple times. So there's a lot going on. Now, if that wasn't enough, you have 2 different phases in this game. The day phase, where you're taking all of these actions, and you have the night phase. The night phase, right? And this is where your Dead of Winter sort of events happen, where you draw one of these and you get to see all of the things that you're going to have to deal with. And this is where one of the main features that happens is you have these skill checks that you're going to be having to do. And that goes back to, if we look at my player character here for a second, one of the cards that you fill out at the beginning of the game, and you roll for your stats a la D&D. And you can see that I have 4 stats, I have 2 different traits, and then each of them has a number associated with them. And so with that, you're going to be testing on these scenarios and getting results based on that. And most of the stuff, let's be frank, at nighttime is bad. I mean, this is more of your pandemic-esque, these are the things you're going to have to deal with, the hurdles you're going to have to overcome along the way, because you're surviving. You're not just playing. There's also a whole reaction deck that's going to be happening if you have certain omens involved, because some of these resources are going to have specific icons on them. If I can pull up one here, for example, that if you pull this one from the resource bag, you'll notice that it's got a very specific icon which corresponds to a certain time, a certain omen, a certain weather condition, if you will. And then you're pulling from the reaction deck here and getting one of those, which again, very positive, but also potentially very negative. Unexpected things happen in the wilderness when you're trying to survive. Now, I didn't go into too much detail about the rest of it. You'll notice that I have the hex-based system here. I thought these trays were a little bit superfluous. I thought they were a little bit fluff, but they're actually very nice because you can see I can just pick this up and move this without any difficulty of losing my terrain. And so they fit together nicely. You start out with a starting hex, and as you're exploring these hexes, they usually start flipped over like this. And depending on what's flipped up on the other side, you can see there's a ravine that you could go and mine down there. You have the water you're going to be fishing from here. And so those are how you tell what actions you can take on each spot. And you draw them when you're exploring from this bag of the set number of... I wasn't a huge fan of Mythwind. Too open world, too Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing for me. I needed more objective, right? I needed more direction. I am not a wander aimlessly type of person, video game or board game wise. I like to have a little bit of incentive, direction, push. And that's where I think this does Mythwind one up. These are your objectives along the way, if you will. And you get a set number of them to start out with. What you really get here at the beginning of the game is the scenario that you're doing. And so Seeds of the Wind is the first one. And then down here in the corner, it tells you which one of these objectives, these other objectives that I just mentioned, you're drawing. And these are individual ones that tell you, okay, in order to complete this, do X, Y, and Z. So for the beginning scenario, it literally just says gather water, fish, forage, mine, and create a shelter. Boom, you did it. You completed these actions, you flip it over, resolve what happens, and there you go. But as you go on, you're going to be having to do other actions. And so this is the basic first scenario. It's just telling you or making you learn what all the actions are. When you get deeper into the game, though, for example, each of these scenarios has additional cards that you're going to be playing through. And these are the midpoint objectives that are going to guide you towards the end of the scenario, but not push you in any one direction necessarily. So it gives you some freedom and some flexibility from that standpoint. This case, you have omen signs that you need to research. This one, you need to build something particular for your outpost via specific crafting materials. And so it's going to give you various objectives like that along the way that it's not going to tell you how to build it. It's going to tell you, okay, maybe a clue of what resource you're going to need, but then you're going to have to go to one of these areas, figure it out, and then figure out which pieces are actually needed to make it together. The good thing is that huge crafting deck that I showed you, if you guess wrong on what two pieces that go together, you're not penalized, but you're just not also going to find it. So take that for what you will. The last portion of things that we haven't even talked about are behemoths. These are the monsters that you're going to be going up against. And I say that very loosely because you're not necessarily going head to head with them. You're not battling them. You're not trying to squash them for the sake of, fighting the ultimate enemy. But they're going to be things that you're going to be interacting with, dealing with, skill checking with, without too many spoilers along the way. And so it gives you that element of mystery, that element of exploration, that element of discovery, while not necessarily putting you always in the headfirst combat, D&D sort of smash everything you see mindset, which is refreshing, especially that other games like this, similar to Vagrant Song or Lands of Galzir, put you in similar positions, where it's not just smash, smash, kill, kill, bang, bang. It's something less along those lines, which is refreshing. Now, that's not to say that everything that you're crafting, like I just mentioned, is a mystery. You have this large deck of also craftables, most of this stuff are going in the outposts, that it literally just tells you what you need. For example, dugout canoes. Dugout canoes will just tell you, okay, you need this amount of wood, you need this, and then it requires this down here at the bottom. This is what you get for a reward. So that's very straightforward when you're doing it, right? Must be built near a lake. You need treated pitch and wood, but it's not going to tell you where to get the wood from. It's not going to tell you how to get treated pitch. That's what you're going to have to find out for yourself. So that is Stonesaga in a nutshell. Without going into too many spoilers, without me going into too many details of the turn-by-turn basis of your exploration of these hex-based grids to give you the spots, opportunities to gather resources, to spend your actions, and to survive, because you will lose people. The deck of survivor cards here that they gave me is this big. And so you're expected to lose people. You're expected for them to become legends. You're expected for them to carry on the passing of the torch, if you will, to the future generations in this game. This is not a, if you die, you're out sort of game, which again is a different spin than we're necessarily used to. You're not penalized. You're not discouraged from having someone die like in most situations. They just can also age out and become legends to benefit the future generations. There you go. That's Stonesaga. So, now that we've gone through the glimpse of it, what are my thoughts on it? Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is unique. There are not too many other games that are doing similar design elements in this sense. It sounds similar, but like the Forests of Radagast, Lands of Galzir, those types of games, Iridia, it has that vibe where it's more open, it's cooperative in a pure sense, and it's really, honestly, it's an action optimization resource puzzle type game. How are you spending your limited amount of energy in order to gather the maximum amount of resources in order to get the energy back by also allowing you to survive the night with what you need in the first place to get enough to continue going on in the future on a continual basis? And that's where the player dynamic, the number of players, is going to be interesting, because the more players, the less energy you each start with. The less players, the higher amount of energy, which gives you more flexibility, but you also can't spread out as much. And that's the dichotomy that this game at different player counts will give you. I really like the unique mechanics that they've got here with the cards. It's really unique, especially with that fishing example that I showed you. It's just a nice little puzzle with a little bit of chaos, which doesn't make it too easy to get the resources, but it doesn't put them impossibly out of your grasp, especially if you don't roll well, which can also lead to a lot of frustration. Because like I mentioned, the discovery deck here, the reaction decks, the night deck, they all have an element of potential skill checks that you're going to be doing. And if you just don't roll right in combination with the skills that you got from rolling at the beginning here with your player character card, well, yeah, I mean, you can lose some of those rather quickly. But it's not the end all be all. It's not a make it or break it like a lot of other games. And so it doesn't hold you down. You fall forward in a nice way, which some people may like and some people may not like. Like, if I fail, I want to be penalized. I want to reap the rewards of succeeding and bear the burden of defeat if I don't. And so, again, your mileage may vary. This game is surprisingly puzzle-like in its nature of doing these crafting and organizing them, orienting them, and choosing correctly on which ones are going to go together to make you something that you need. And the optimization that goes with the energy and the resources is thematically incorporated. Things that are more tasking, things that are more demanding are going to cost you more energy, and you're going to be able to do less of them. And you have to be careful not to fill up with too many resources that aren't useful for you, but also getting enough that, you know, you actually can make the things you need to survive, because otherwise you're penalized as well. But there's a lot to keep track of. There is. Even doing it solo with 2 characters, there's a lot of tokens, there's a lot of decks, and there's a lot of resources. And so you have to just realize that it's a component heavy driven game. And I can see people also having mixed feelings about that. Some people are like, yeah, no problem, right? Like, I play heavy Euros all the time. We got resources over here. We got resources over there. We got resources everywhere. We have 6 boards set up. I'm completely okay with that. Then this is going to be something that you like, because there is not necessarily perfect information in the strategy of doing things, but it is for sure an action optimization game at its heart and its core. And it does a thorough job at making you feel like you're making progression, you're making gains, but also the stress of, do I have quite enough? Will I have enough? Is definitely there. Things I'm sort of mixed on. You know, if you don't like any of those games that I mentioned, if you're not a big fan of open world, non-narrative driven games, because this doesn't have an overarching narrative, at least, you know, the prototype that I have, this is not going to change your mind either. It's not. If you like the action optimization, it has a worker placement feel, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a strict worker placement, like I mentioned, with more of the resource optimization puzzle, as opposed to purely, I get this resource, I convert it into another, and X goes to Y goes to Z because I have enough, because I have the chain, because I have the production. It's more complicated than that, but also more nuanced and slightly more chaotic, with the matching of the symbols on the sides of the square tokens, like I said. And because of those issues, if you are looking for perfect information, again, this game is not going to suit you, because, like I mentioned, the dice rolling, the skill checks, and then also the random flipping up of cards. When you go to one of these areas and you go to the forest and you flip up 2 of these cards and you just don't get the resource that you're looking for there, well, then you're just not going to get what you want, and that's going to be frustrating for you as well. So I can see people not liking the random draws from the decks in addition to that. I don't really have anything hugely negative to say. And that's not that, you know, I'm saying that this game is perfect by any means, but it just doesn't have a whole lot of, wow, this isn't really good, or this doesn't work, or this shouldn't be there. They all have purposes with where they're at. I would say that though it's similar to Mythwind and those other games I mentioned, I think it's also much harder. And that's probably the biggest buyer beware. This is not going to be Zen-like, peaceful, stress-free, like those other games I mentioned with Lands of Galzier or that type of open world game, even Mythwind. This is more pressure because you are very limited in your scope of what you need to do. And so if you're looking for something that is less pressured, then this would probably be also something I would highly consider passing on, because it's going to cause stress from that aspect of things, because you're going to feel the squeeze of the resources, trying to get the resources you need, as well as the failures that are going to inevitably come along with some of those skill checks, some of those reactions, some of those events between the knights, the reactions, the behemoths, and just not getting the resources that you need in the first place. So final thoughts on this. When I opened this up and I saw all of the tokens and I saw all of the cards, I said, whoa, okay. Is all of this actually going to work together? Because, you know, even when I talked about previously Unconscious Mind, I said there were still one or two things on there that I just kind of went, you know, do I really need this? Is this actually being utilized? Could this game be just as good without this element? Did I feel like I was missing something since I didn't do this portion of things? And the answer, even with that, was, well, no, kind of, there's just stuff that I just really wasn't kind of like, With this, there isn't an element missing from that, right? Like there's not an element of this that I go, oh, geez, this one just doesn't fit. Oh, this one doesn't work here at all, right? All of these have their place. All of them interact nicely. All of them flow very smoothly. And so that's probably the biggest compliment I can give it overall. At the same time, for someone who has slightly less patience from this style of things, when you're aligning those numbers and tokens and colors based on the resources that you're randomly getting from some of these places, it's also very frustrating. It's also very frustrating. And I say that as both a pro and a con, meaning the game is not easy to get what you want. It rewards you for doing well and being clever, but it's also going to drive you a little bit sort of way at times too, because it's going, okay, you know, how do I get this? What is the avenue that I need to approach to get this piece, to figure out how to make this thing? And that's going to be your biggest variable in figuring out whether or not this game is right for you. Crafting, is crafting going to be more frustrating, or is it going to be more pleasing from a I figured it out aspect of things? Because that is the main element of this game across the board once you get to where you need to and having the resources in the first place. That being said, like I mentioned at the beginning, I like this a lot more than Mythwind. This is more of my type of game than Mythwind was. And so already I would be more inclined to play this again, whereas I was not really inclined to play Mythwind again after I played the prototype, right? Like I played through it and I was like, okay, that was a great experience, but I don't have any interest in playing it again. With this one, again, I think there's going to be a little bit of a group dynamic, because myself personally playing it alone, it would not be my cup of tea always. But if you have people that are really liking those elements of things, there is definitely a hive mind approach that I can get more excited for when other people are excited about this as well. And that doesn't always happen with games either, right? There's plenty of games that you've probably played where people are like, oh yeah, this game's awesome. And you're like, really? This is the thing you like? Okay. No, like this is, okay, wow, okay, we got this. And then oh, wow, we got this, and then we got this, and then we can coordinate this, and we can make the puzzle. I mean, that's kind of the cool thing when it comes to games like Kingdom Death Monster, Aeon Trespass Odyssey, with making the combo system out of the resources that you get from those battles and making the gear that makes you more powerful. That's the same sort of feeling you get when you can craft the thing that you want here, but just in a non-violent sort of way for the most part. So it has that same vibe or that same rewarding feeling when it comes to this. So there you go, Stonesaga. OOMM, thank you for sending me this. Thank you for allowing me to talk about it. Check out the crowdfunding campaign when it goes live. Put the link down below. There you go. Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, let me know. I'm here to talk about it. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Have a great day.